"I speak 9 languages," said the young black woman. The judge laughed, but he shouldn't have. Everyone thought she was joking, until she started speaking in Russian, then Swahili, then Mandarin, one after another. In seconds, the courtroom that once mocked her went completely silent, and the judge who laughed was left stunned, realizing he had just witnessed true genius. 9 languages. The judge nearly choked on his laughter. The entire courtroom echoed with giggles that bounced off the marble walls. Even the court stenographer hid a small smile behind her hand. Standing in the middle of the courtroom was Amara Johnson, a 22-year-old black woman with calm eyes and a worn-out notebook clutched tightly to her chest. The notebook looked ordinary, but its pages were filled with words, thousands of them, written in different scripts and alphabets, some no one in that courtroom could even recognize. She wasn't a lawyer, not even a student of law, just a young interpreter who had been called to testify as a witness in a case that seemed far too grand for someone like her. Yet, there she stood, her posture straight, her voice gentle but steady. She had said it softly, almost shyly. "I speak 9 languages, Your Honor." There was no arrogance in her tone, only honesty. But honesty, it seemed, was the funniest thing the courtroom had heard that day. The gray-haired judge, Judge Whitmore, leaned back in his large leather chair and chuckled. His voice echoed with the kind of disbelief that often hides behind politeness. "Miss Johnson," he said, raising an eyebrow, "maybe you mean you know 9 words in 9 languages?" The laughter returned, louder this time. Even the defense attorney couldn't help smirking. A few reporters sitting at the back scribbled notes, already shaping their stories in their minds. "Young girl claims to speak 9 languages in fraud trial." But Amara didn't laugh. She didn't even flinch. Her expression stayed the same, calm, almost peaceful. She had been laughed at before, many times. In classrooms, in job interviews, in public places. But each time, she had learned to hold her ground and let her silence speak. Her mother's words echoed in her mind, as clear as if she were standing beside her again. "When they laugh, don't talk louder. Just let the truth talk for you." So she stood there quietly, her gaze fixed on the judge, her heartbeat slow and steady. The laughter began to fade. Some people looked at her, expecting her to respond, to stutter or backtrack, but she didn't. Instead, she reached in her notebook and carefully turned a page, revealing handwritten phrases in multiple scripts: Arabic, Mandarin, Swahili, Spanish, French, German, Japanese, Russian, and Portuguese. The court clerk, sitting nearby, leaned forward curiously. Amara's handwriting was neat, the accents and characters perfectly drawn. Judge Whitmore adjusted his glasses. "You're saying you can actually speak all of those?" he asked, half mocking, half curious. Amara nodded once. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge sighed, as if humoring a child. "All right then," he said. "Say something in, I don't know, Japanese." Without hesitation, Amara spoke softly, her voice flowing with precision. "Watashi wa Amara desu. Koko en ikai. Shinjitsu o hane satame en I kimishita. My name is Amara. I am here to speak the truth." The room grew quieter. Her pronunciation was flawless, not the clumsy sound of someone repeating memorized phrases, but the natural rhythm of someone who understood the language. Before anyone could react, the judge leaned forward again. "In French." Amara met his gaze and replied smoothly, "La vérité n'est dépend pas de la couleur de la peau, Monsieur le Juge." Truth doesn't depend on the color of one's skin, Your Honor. A few heads turned. The humor in the room began to dissolve. Even the defense attorney's smile disappeared. The judge blinked, momentarily lost for words. Then, trying to regain his authority, he muttered, "Impressive, rehearsed, perhaps." Amara gently closed her notebook. "No, sir," she said quietly. "Just learned." A subtle strength began to fill the room, the kind that doesn't shout but demands attention. Her calmness unsettled those who had laughed moments ago. A reporter whispered to another, "She's actually good." Judge Whitmore cleared his throat and tried again. In Russian. Amara didn't hesitate. "Da, я говорю по-русски очень хорошо." "Yes, I speak Russian very well." The accused man, a foreign businessman sitting at the defense table, suddenly turned to look at her, startled. He muttered something under his breath in Russian, testing her. Amara replied instantly, her tone firm yet polite. Whatever she said made the man freeze. His lawyer leaned toward him, confused. The judge, watching all this unfold, felt the laughter that had once seemed so natural now stick in his throat. Amara didn't smile, didn't boast. She simply stood there, waiting for him to continue. The silence in the courtroom grew heavy, and for the first time, Judge Whitmore looked unsure. He slowly leaned forward, studying her with new eyes, eyes that finally saw not a young girl from a poor neighborhood, but a woman who had worked tirelessly for every word she had just spoken. Amara took a quiet breath. Her mother's voice whispered again in her memory, "When they laugh, don't fight back. The truth will do it for you." And now, standing before a room that had just mocked her, she realized the truth had finally spoken. Amara had grown up in one of the poorest neighborhoods in Atlanta, the kind of place where dreams were often smaller than survival, and the noise of police sirens was more common than the sound of laughter. Her home was a small, worn-out apartment on the third floor of a building that always smelled faintly of smoke and rain. Her mother, Ruth Johnson, worked 2 jobs, cleaning houses by day and serving tables by night. Every morning before leaving, she would gently brush Amara's hair, kiss her on the forehead, and whisper, "Study hard, baby. The world won't listen to us unless we know how to speak its language." Those words, simple yet powerful, stayed with Amara. She didn't fully understand them back then, but she felt them. Deep down, she knew her mother wasn't just talking about English. She was talking about voice, expression, and the power of words. Amara was different from other kids her age. While they played games in the streets, she sat by her window, listening to the world. She loved sounds, the rhythm of conversations, the melody and accents, the rise and fall of speech. Her teachers spoke fast and sharp. Her neighbors rolled their Rs in Spanish, and tourists outside the city museum whispered softly in French. She would mimic them all, repeating phrases until her tongue learned the shape of their words. Sometimes she'd walk through the market imitating vendors, switching voices from one stall to another, making people laugh. But at home, it wasn't just for fun. It was practice. At 10, she found an old radio at a junk shop. The shop owner, an elderly man named Mr. Harris, sold it for $2, smiling at the curious little girl who said she wanted it for learning. The radio was scratched and dusty, but when she turned it on, it came alive with voices from around the world. News in Arabic, songs in Portuguese, interviews in German, and even Japanese dramas late at night. She couldn't understand any of it at first, but she listened day after day. She began to catch patterns, words that repeated, tones that carried emotion. She'd pause, rewind, imitate, and write everything in her little notebooks. By the time she turned 12, she could greet people in half a dozen languages. By 15, she could hold basic conversations in Spanish, French, and Swahili. Her classmates used to tease her. "Girl, who you trying to be, a walking dictionary?" Sometimes the laughter stung, but she smiled anyway, because every new word she learned felt like a key that opened a door out of poverty, a door to the world her mother had dreamed for her. Their apartment had no computer, no internet, but Amara made the library her second home. She'd sit in the foreign language section for hours, flipping through dictionaries and language guides, copying phrases by hand because she couldn't afford to buy the books. Librarians began to notice her dedication and started saving old language magazines for her. Her mother, though exhausted, never stopped encouraging her. After long double shifts, she'd come home late at night, her hands rough and tired, but she'd always ask, "So, what new word did you learn today?" And Amara would smile and reply, "Today I learned gracias. It means thank you in Spanish. And merci, that's thank you in French." Her mom would laugh softly and say, "Then thank you, my genius girl." But when Amara was 12, tragedy struck. Her mother fell sick. The long hours and sleepless nights had finally caught up to her. Hospitals were expensive, and though Amara tried everything to help, her mother passed away quietly one morning, holding her daughter's hand. That day, Amara stopped speaking for almost a week. The silence in their apartment was unbearable. No radio, no practice, no notebooks, just grief. Then, one night, she found one of her mother's old aprons folded on the kitchen counter. In the pocket, there was a small note, worn from being read many times. Her mother had written it long ago. "You have a gift, Amara. The world is big, but your voice can travel farther than pain. Never stop learning. Never stop speaking." Amara sat on the floor and cried until her tears dried. Then she made herself a promise, one she would carry for the rest of her life. "I'll make her proud, no matter who laughs." From that night on, she turned her pain into purpose. She studied harder than ever before. She began volunteering as a translator for immigrants in the neighborhood, helping them fill forms and talk to officials. Each time she spoke for someone who couldn't, she felt closer to her mother. Years later, people would ask her how she managed to learn 9 languages without teachers, classes, or money. She'd smile and say softly, "Because I had a reason and a promise." That promise, born in a tiny, dim apartment in Atlanta, would one day carry her voice all the way into a courtroom, where the same world that once laughed at her would finally listen. The case that brought Amara to court wasn't just any trial. It was one of the most talked about international fraud cases in recent years. Newspapers called it the Volkov scandal. The accused, Dmitry Volkov, was a wealthy businessman from Moscow, charged with running a massive scam network that had tricked small investors across Europe and Africa out of millions. His company had operated through fake online ventures, promising returns that never came. The courtroom was filled with people, journalists, lawyers, translators, and government officials. Cameras weren't allowed, but everyone knew the story would be on the front page by evening. Amara had been called as a witness because she had once worked as a temporary assistant for one of Volkov's partner companies in Atlanta. She had seen a few suspicious money transfers and was there only to confirm a document. Nothing more. At least, that was the plan. On the second day of the trial, things went wrong. The main interpreter, a professional translator who handled the communications between the Russian witnesses and African investors, suddenly collapsed from exhaustion. He was rushed to the hospital, leaving the court in chaos. Judge Whitmore rubbed his temples. "We can't continue without a translator who speaks both Russian and Swahili," he said, clearly frustrated. "Anyone qualified?" There was silence. The defense translator only knew Russian and English. The prosecution's interpreter knew Swahili and French, but none could bridge both sides. The entire proceeding came to a standstill. That's when Amara, sitting quietly in the witness row, hesitated for a moment, then slowly raised her hand. "Your Honor," she said softly, "I can translate both languages." The judge turned toward her, half surprised, half annoyed. "Both?" "Yes, sir." He sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Miss Johnson, this is a court of law, not a talent show." A few people chuckled under their breath. It reminded Amara of that first day when laughter filled the room at the mention of her skills. But this time, she didn't flinch. She took a small step forward. "Please, sir, let me try. I promise I can handle it." The judge studied her for a long moment. The courtroom grew still, waiting for his response. Finally, he waved a hand impatiently. "Fine. One sentence." He picked up a document from his desk and read aloud a short statement, a legal paragraph written in English. "Translate this into Swahili." Amara took the paper, read it once silently, then began to speak. Her voice was clear, calm, and confident. She translated the line flawlessly into Swahili, using the correct legal phrasing, respectful tone, and perfect pronunciation. The Swahili-speaking witnesses nodded, impressed. A hush spread through the courtroom. Even the court clerk looked up, her pen frozen in midair. Judge Whitmore frowned slightly, hiding his surprise. Now in Russian, he said quickly, as if testing her limits. Without hesitation, Amara repeated the same paragraph, this time in smooth, precise Russian. Her voice carried the rich, rolling sounds of native fluency. This time, even Dmitry Volkov, the accused man, lifted his head and stared at her in disbelief. "Ty Goverish Peruski," he asked, "you speak Russian?" Amara smiled slightly, her eyes steady. "Da svobodno." "Yes, fluently." The courtroom murmured. People exchanged glances, journalists scribbling notes furiously, lawyers whispering to each other. The judge blinked twice, his tone now softer. "Well, continue." As the session resumed, Amara was given the interpreter's seat. Her heart raced, but she remained composed. The first cross-examination began between a Russian witness and an African investor. Both men spoke quickly, with heavy accents and strong emotions. But Amara kept up, switching from Russian to Swahili, then to English when needed, without missing a single beat. Her translations were not only accurate, but graceful. She captured tone, intention, and emotion, ensuring nothing was lost between languages. It was as if she could hear the meaning before the words even finished. At one point, a lawyer interrupted. "Miss Johnson, could you clarify that last sentence?" Amara nodded respectfully and explained the cultural nuance behind a Russian idiom that had confused the court. The explanation was so sharp and clear that even the judge looked impressed. Volkov, who had been sitting quietly until then, leaned forward. "Tyokanamnaya," he muttered under his breath. "You're very smart." Amara didn't respond. She wasn't there for compliments. She was there to do her job. By midday, She had interpreted hours of testimony across 3 languages. Not once did she ask for a pause. Even the senior translators, now watching from the audience, began taking notes on her technique. When the session ended, the judge removed his glasses and looked at her with something that wasn't mockery anymore. It was admiration. "Miss Johnson," he said, his tone thoughtful, "how on earth did you learn to speak all that?" Amara hesitated for a moment, then smiled quietly. "From people who never had time to teach," she said, "and from radios that never stopped talking." The courtroom fell silent once again, not out of disbelief this time, but respect. Even Judge Whitmore, the man who once laughed at her claim, said nothing for several seconds. He finally nodded, almost to himself. "Well, Miss Johnson," he said softly, "you've just turned this courtroom into a classroom, and I, for one, am listening." And that was the moment Amara realized. She hadn't just earned their attention. She had earned their respect. As the trial went on, Amara's role grew far beyond that of a simple witness. What started as a moment of chance soon turned into something extraordinary. Every day, she arrived before anyone else, setting her notes neatly in front of her, preparing herself to bridge 3 languages in a courtroom full of tension and disbelief. At first, people thought her early success was luck. Maybe she'd memorized a few fancy words or rehearsed before the hearing. But as the days passed, it became impossible to deny what everyone was witnessing. Amara Johnson wasn't just translating. She was commanding the entire courtroom with her intelligence and calm authority. She translated complex financial documents full of legal jargon, switching effortlessly between Russian, Swahili, and English. She handled witness testimonies with care, making sure every emotion, pause, and inflection was carried across perfectly. Sometimes, when lawyers stumbled trying to phrase a question correctly for foreign witnesses, Amara would politely interject, reframe it in simpler words, and help both sides understand. Even Judge Whitmore, once skeptical, began relying on her. "Miss Johnson, would you clarify that for the court?" he'd ask, almost daily. And every time, she would respond with composure, her voice calm and assured. By the end of the first week, even the prosecution and defense, who rarely agreed on anything, had to admit they trusted her more than any translator they'd worked with before. But not everyone was happy about it. The defense lawyer, a sharp and arrogant man named Mr. Collins, didn't like being upstaged, especially not by a 22-year-old woman he had once laughed at. One afternoon, during a high-profile session, he decided to test her. He smirked as he flipped through his papers. "Miss Johnson," he said loudly, "since you claim to be fluent in multiple languages, perhaps you could help us with something a bit more challenging." The courtroom went quiet. Everyone could sense the mocking tone. Amara straightened her back, meeting his gaze. "Of course, sir," she said softly. Collins turned to the audience and then back to her. "Let's try Mandarin Chinese, shall we?" He said the words slowly, exaggerating each syllable, expecting her to falter. He then rattled off a long sentence in Mandarin, a dense legal phrase filled with technical vocabulary that even native speakers might hesitate over. It was a clear attempt to humiliate her. But before he could even smirk, Amara replied, in fluent, clear Mandarin. "Falu buji shir wenzi, ta shir wenhua hashimra de yuyen." Law is not just words. It's the language of culture and trust. Her pronunciation was perfect, tone sharp, rhythm steady. She even paused at the right emotional beats, like someone who had spoken it her whole life. The courtroom fell silent for a few seconds. Then murmurs began to spread, people whispering, glancing at each other in disbelief. Amara didn't stop there. She smiled politely and turned toward the judge. "The phrase Mr. Collins used is a complex one," she explained in English. "It doesn't directly translate word for word, but in context, it refers to a legal agreement that depends more on trust than on written terms. In Mandarin culture, such phrasing carries a deeper meaning about integrity." The entire courtroom, from the lawyers to the audience, erupted, not in laughter this time, but in applause. Even the Russian defendant, Dmitry Volkov, smiled faintly and tapped the table as if applauding her brilliance. Mr. Collins' face flushed red. He sat down quietly, avoiding her gaze. His little trap had backfired spectacularly. Judge Whitmore, who had been watching closely, adjusted his glasses, visibly impressed. He leaned forward, a slow smile forming. "Miss Johnson," he said thoughtfully, "how on earth did you learn all that?" Amara's expression softened. She didn't look proud or triumphant, only peaceful. "From people who never had time to teach," she said quietly, "and from radios that never stopped talking." For a long moment, the judge said nothing. The courtroom, usually filled with chatter, felt sacredly still. Her words carried something beyond intelligence. They carried truth, pain, and persistence. Whitmore leaned back in his chair, speechless for once. The faint condescension that used to sit in his eyes was gone. What replaced it was genuine respect, the kind reserved for people who fight through life with nothing but faith and hard work. From that day on, Amara wasn't just the girl who spoke 9 languages. She became the heartbeat of the trial. Every translation, she delivered connected worlds, bridged cultures, and revealed the beauty of understanding. Journalists began writing about her. "The polyglot of justice," one newspaper headline read. Others called her the voice between nations. And every time she stepped into that courtroom afterward, no one laughed. They listened, because now they knew Amara Johnson didn't just speak 9 languages. She spoke the universal language of perseverance. The trial ended 2 weeks later, and by then, the name Amara Johnson had become known far beyond the courthouse walls. Every session, every translation, every calm correction she made had left an impression not only on the jury, but on everyone who had witnessed her brilliance. Because of her, what could have been a confusing international case ran with precision and fairness. The jury, once overwhelmed by linguistic and cultural barriers, now understood every word of testimony, every statement, every emotional undertone. She didn't just translate words, she translated truth. When the final day arrived, the courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the benches, and murmurs rippled through the audience as the judge entered. Amara sat quietly near the witness stand, her notebook resting on her lap. It was the same worn-out notebook she had carried for years, filled with notes from a lifetime of learning. The judge cleared his throat and began to read the verdict. On the charges of international fraud, wire deception, and money laundering, this court finds the defendant, Dmitry Volkov, guilty on all counts. A wave of relief and whispers swept through the room. Dmitry lowered his head. Justice had been served. But before the judge brought down the gavel, he paused. His gaze shifted toward Amara. The same man who had once laughed at her now looked at her with quiet admiration. He removed his glasses, his voice steady but softer than before. "This court owes its clarity to one young woman," he said, who reminded us that talent doesn't wear a uniform. It comes from anywhere, even from a girl brave enough to say, "I speak 9 languages." The entire courtroom rose to its feet, clapping for her. Even the reporters put down their pens for a moment to applaud. For the first time, Amara smiled, not out of pride but out of peace. She had fulfilled her promise to her mother. That moment changed her life forever. By the next morning, her story was everywhere. The girl who spoke 9 languages solves international case. One headline read. News stations wanted interviews. Social media buzzed with admiration. People shared her story as an inspiration for youth, especially those from humble beginnings. University deans and scholarship committees began calling. International institutions wanted her to study with them. But the most surprising call came from the very same person who had once doubted her, Judge Whitmore himself. He invited her to his office. When she arrived, he stood to greet her, something few had ever seen him do. "Miss Johnson," he said with genuine warmth, "I was wrong about you. You're exactly what the law needs. Not just intelligence, but empathy, understanding, and respect for all cultures." Then he handed her an envelope. Inside was a full scholarship offer for international law and linguistics at a prestigious university. Amara's eyes filled with tears. "Sir, I don't know what to say," she whispered. Whitmore smiled. "Just keep speaking, Miss Johnson. The world needs to hear voices like yours." Months later, Amara stood on a grand stage at an international language conference in Geneva. The hall was filled with scholars, diplomats, and linguists from across the globe. The banner above her read, "Voices Without Borders." As she stepped up to the microphone, there was a hush. Cameras flashed, but Amara focused on the words she was about to say, words that carried her story, her pain, and her triumph. She began in English, her tone steady and heartfelt. "When I was 10, I listened to an old radio that spoke in tongues I didn't understand. I used to imagine that one day, I'd be able to speak back." Then, seamlessly, she switched to French. "Quand il mot qu'on avance rêves, souvenez-vous. C'est seulement parce qu'ils ne peuvent pas imagine or less realize it use memes. When they laugh at your dreams, remember, it's only because they can't imagine themselves doing it." She paused, looked around the hall filled with world-renowned experts, and continued, "Mais vous pouvez. Vous devez seulement commencer. But you can. You just have to start." For a moment, there was silence. Then the entire audience stood. The applause echoed across the hall, long and thunderous. People from every continent rose to their feet for a girl from a forgotten corner of Atlanta who had taught them the true meaning of perseverance. After the event, journalists surrounded her once more. But this time when they asked, "What's next for you, Amara?" she simply smiled. "Next," she said, "I'm going to teach others to find their voices in any language they can." And as she left the stage, her mother's words echoed softly in her heart. "Study hard, baby. The world won't listen to us unless we know how to speak its language." Now, the world wasn't just listening, it was learning from her. Because Amara Johnson had proven that dreams don't belong to privilege or to power. They belong to those who never stop speaking, even when the world laughs first. If you found this story inspiring, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss another powerful video. Thanks for watching.